Greetings once again. Welcome to our program, The Silence of Our Friends. That's exactly right. The Silence of Our Friends. There are all kinds of silences that have affected black and brown people in these yet to be United States. All kinds of silences that have affected all people. All kinds of silences that have affected and infected, for that matter, injustices, whether social or racial or educational or financial or otherwise. And so this program is set up and designed so that we can address issues where people have been silent, that can make a difference, that can make a change, but because of their silence, things have gone on unaffected. And so welcome tonight. I'm George M. Matthews II, and it's my happy privilege to be here with you this evening. We're here every Monday night, each Monday, all other things being equal, 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. And it's our request of you that you would help us to expand our space on the YouTube platform, the YouTube channel. Of course, you can type in The Silence of Our Friends, and you can also type in my name, George M. Matthews II, and all of our videos should come up and be made available to you just that simply. But please, right here, let's take a moment and share the link. Those of you that are over on YouTube, I'm not sure how many are over there at this point. The majority of the streamers choose, for whatever reasons they do, our Facebook page. And so if you're here, please share the bottom right corner of your screen. Share the link with all of your followers, all of your retinue, all the people who matter to you and those to whom you matter. And so please share right now. Take a minute and do that. And anytime you come back to the YouTube channel, please subscribe, like, and follow. The same holds true for our Facebook page. If you would follow us and make certain that you are being alerted each time we release a Facebook live stream. We do this from our ministry. But this particular page and this time, space and time, is dedicated to social concerns, social ills, social and racial, ethnic inequities. And so we're here tonight. The topic of our show tonight is Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, Part 3. This is the third offering, the third issuance. Last week, of course, we covered Part 2, and the week before that, or maybe the week before that, it was Part 1. Black Lives Matter, it's a challenge. Black Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter, Part 3. And the real question for our show tonight, in parentheses or parenthetical, is the answer to this question. What is the matter? Question mark. What is the matter? And so if Black Lives Matter, and the real question is, do all lives matter to the same degree of value and equity? Are Black lives, in the eyes of those Americans, the majority of people in America, do Black lives matter to the same degree as white lives? Do minority, Black and brown lives matter to the same degree financially, from a value perspective, from a worth perspective, from a perspective of balance and fairness, so forth and so on? When we ask the question of Black Lives Mattering versus All Lives Matter, which is generally the retort that comes back from the white majority in America, when you have a movement of people triggered on muchly by the slaying of Mr. George Floyd back in the month of May 2020, and just an onslaught of people who can no longer be silent. And they're calling attention to issues that have pervaded and have been relevant in Black culture here in these yet to be United States forever and a day. But now, because of social media, because everyone is a reporter by way of a cell telephone, by way of the premise of the 6 degrees of separation, which states that if two strangers meet, if they talk through 4, 5, by the time they get to the 6th person, they know someone in common. And this thereby connects us with the globe. And as it was in the late 50s, early 60s, a bit before my time, with the movement that was dubbed the Civil Rights Movement, when the children of Birmingham, that's right, Birmingham, Alabama, the place we call now home, were shown across the world landscape, being the unleashing of Bull Connor's animals, the dogs, the German Shepherds, the paddy wagons, those children being arrested as they were missing school to punctuate an issue and a concern that was so viable to them, fighting for the freedom of black and brown people in America. When the rest of the world saw the fire hoses, when the rest of the world saw that those hoses were released with such venom and thrust that it often removed the bark off the telephone poles and off of trees because of the thrust. And I've listened to the interviews of people who were then known as the children of the movement, and they said the water hoses were fierce. And to see them covering each other, and to see them dragged in the streets, and to see the young ladies with their dresses turned up, and the officers, police officers, Bull Connor included, with such heinous attitudes and such malicious attitudes, as if these were not people at all, they did not count at all. And I'm saying that mentality in the early 60s, late 50s, early 60s, is a carryover from the Confederate movement, from the war between the states, from enslavement in America, so forth and so on, that the value of black and brown people just has not been the equivalent. Because when we talk about it, something mattering, the matter of something, M-A-T-T-E-R, besides the scientific, besides the physical, the word matter, to me, when I use it in context, it means that something is of such dire consequence that interruptions are dictated and interruptions become involved because of the consequence, because of the severity of the matter at hand. When something doesn't matter, of course, life goes on in its normalcy, uninterrupted and unpunctuated by any break in events, in any turn of events. And so when something matters again, it means that life is interrupted. It means that attention is garnered and gathered. It means that something is being punctuated by the degree of which the thing matters, or for that instance, does not matter. Well, some people say to me, again, I have to deal with show justifications because I'm a pastor and have been a pastor for a number of years now, and I love what I do, and I'm humbled and honored every day of my life to be called to do that. But many would say to me, George Matthews, you need to commit to the preaching and the teaching of the Word of God in your world. Stay in your world, stay in your corner, and let matters be as they are as far as the social ills are concerned. But apparently someone forgot to mention this to Jesus. This country in major consequence was involved and founded upon the Word of God. Jesus, being the hero of the New Testament, said in St. Matthew chapter 5, if the salt, first of all, he says, you, my followers, the church is and are collectively the salt of the earth. And if the salt has lost its savor, S-A-V-O-R, its flavor, its effect, if it's lost its smell, its aroma, if it's lost its ability to influence the food upon which it touches, if it's lost its savor, it's thenceforth good for nothing but to be cast out and trodden under the feet of men. So this is a political statement. This is Jesus saying that the church, those who are born again and called out by Jesus Christ, should be affecting the earth. We talked about King Ahasuerus last week, who became the king of the queen then, Esther, whose uncle Mordecai spoke to her about a racial issue because it was Haman who wanted to exterminate the Jews ethnically. And the Bible, the book of Esther, I believe 8 chapters, covers the fact that Mordecai, her Jewish uncle, says to her, you are brought to the kingdom for such a time as this. And if you hold your peace, if you attempt to pass as a Persian because the rest of the government doesn't know you're Jewish. I do. God will bring deliverance from another place. We covered it last week that silence and deliverance are connected. If a person refuses to be silent about obvious wrongs and ills, then that is how God often brings deliverance. And so let's get on to the show tonight. There are a few quotes I want to bring to your attention. Of course, we start each show with a very famous statement of Dr. Martin King. He says, what will be remembered in the end will not be the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends. And it was from that statement that I felt activated to get on YouTube and on our social platforms and make people aware that we can no longer be silent. If ever we've been silent, this is not the time to be silent. And lest I forget to make mention of it again, vote, 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 vote. I made a statement to myself, a note to myself, and I want to cover it up. November the 3rd is approaching us. We're 50-something days away from that. And if ever we do not need to, cannot afford to be silent, and need to be, have to be, must be the salt of the earth, it's in this upcoming election. We have many very weighty elections that are forthcoming on the first Tuesday in November. And it is a convenience that we can participate in absentee voting, absentee ballots, and not being able to avoid the lines and perhaps the perceived lengthy process on Tuesday, D-Day in my mind, November 3rd. So vote, vote, vote. That's how we salty the earth. And again, we're not in the category of those who will be silent because we will vote. Make sure you speak to people who are of consequence in your life and ask them, are you registered? Do you know where your ballot place is? And have you made sure that you are eligible to vote? Do you have the necessary identification? And make certain that they are available, if not before, certainly by Tuesday, November 3rd. But the absentee ballot process is probably the better way to go. Nothing in the world, Dr. King makes the statement, is more dangerous than sincere ignorance and conscientious stupidity. People are in one of two categories often. Either they're sincerely ignorant, they mean the best, but they just don't know. They haven't been exposed. They've never had a particular pain or a particular ill, and so they don't have a platform, and out of ignorance then they speak. Or they're they're on the other spectrum, whereby they're conscientious, they're thinking, they're thought-provoking people, they're analytical people who've been trained to think, they've been educated, and yet they remain in this chasm, so to speak, of stupidity. Benjamin E. Mays, who lived from August 1st, 1894 to March 28th, 1984, very long life. I was reminded that I forgot one important fact of his life. He was the president of Morehouse College, HBCU, of course, of note in Atlanta, Georgia, in 1940. And held that position for 27 years, a tenure that shepherded the institution into international prominence. It was under his auspices, under his leadership. Again, he was the intellectual brain of the civil rights movement, American Baptist minister, again, civil rights leader. And also 1934 appointed dean of the School of Religion at Howard University. And there he served until 1940, after which he was assigned to Morehouse College. Thank God for his life. But he makes two statements of which I like to draw, and I hope you've shared this show tonight because it's going to be important. The tragedy of life doesn't lie in not achieving your goal. The tragedy lies in having no goal to reach. It isn't a calamity to die with dreams unfulfilled, but it is a calamity not to dream. It is not a disgrace to not to reach for the stars, but it is a disgrace to have no stars to reach for. Not failure, but low aim is a sin. That's one statement he makes. He makes another very rich statement, Dr. Benjamin Mays. He says, he who starts behind in the great race of life, hear it, must forever remain behind or run faster than the man in front. Now, both of these statements, in my view, speak to the tyranny, the long-lasting tyranny and vestiges of slavery and enslavement of black and brown people in America. We started behind because of this egregious and heinous act of enslavement of black and brown people in America. And then this movement of enslavement and the devaluation of human life, the lowration of human lives, causes people to not have goals, attainable goals, reachable goals. It deflates dreams because of the low value and the demoralization, as I stated, of human life. Again, the premise of our show is to answer the question surrounding the generally unfair treatment of people of color in America. Again, we're going to call the roll tonight, and hopefully I'll end with this roll call. But all lives do matter to God, no question. And that is not the premise, however. Do all lives matter to God? That is not the question. But some would say on the right, and it rhymes with another word, the right, all lives matter to God at the same degree and always have. But the issue is of mattering, but to people, not to God, but to people, particularly whether all lives have the same worth or value as human white life in America. And I've given you this statement before by prominent Lutheran pastor, 1892 through 1984, another rich, long life, Martin Niemöller. Makes a statement, and he makes it at the heels of the end of World War II in Germany, of course, under Nazi rule. He was taken into a prison camp for probably 6 or 7 years, as best I can tell from history and research. But he makes this statement. First, the obvious they, came for the socialists, and I did not speak out. This speaks to silence, because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist. I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews. I did not speak out again because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. This is actual happening in his life as he was taken into the prison camps of Adolf Hitler. Now, allow me, before we call this roll, I like to bring current events into play along with the historical part of our show. And I think what my attempt is and my hope is that I'm reaching the vein of particularly where these mindsets of superiority versus inferiority of black and brown people versus white people in America. From whence did these ideals come? How did these ideals originate, and how are they permeating yet American culture, and how are they being taught even in homes, whether tacitly or intentionally and very directly in homes? Here it is. Something you perhaps haven't heard of before, but this is important. The Civil Liberties Act of 1988, not very long ago. Civil Liberties Act of 1988. Now, this is documented, publication L 100-383. Some of you might want to fact check me. I love that. August 10th, 1988, 102 Statute 904-50A, USC, and 1989. Is the United States, please hear this, federal law that granted reparations, and to break the word down, repairs granted to people for disenfranchisement and unfair treatment. So reparations, repayment, to repair, to make level, to make whole a certain people for certain acts committed treasonous even acts against them, treated against them. And so here it is, granted reparations. Wait for it, wait for it. The people in the back of the room that need to hear this. Reparations, 1988, a federal act granted reparations to Japanese Americans who had been interned, I'm going to define the term in a minute, interned by the United States government during World War II. The act was sponsored by California's Democratic Congressman Norman Mineta, an internee as a child. You hear his last name, it's Japanese. So as a child, he was an internee. And Wyoming's Republican senator, they came across the aisle for this, Senator Alan K. Simpson, who met Mineta while visiting an internment camp. So they both had an experience with this heinous act of prison camps, I'll define it. Stay with me. The third co-sponsor was California's Senator Pete Wilson. You've heard of his name before, perhaps. The bill was supported by the majority of Democrats in Congress, while the majority of Republicans voted against, because Republicans never see any wrong perpetuated against people, minority people, generally speaking. They're generally represented by people who are in the upper class, and because they've not had an experience, they have no relevance to the experiences. So the Republicans voted against it. The act was signed, however, into law, wait for it, by then President Ronald Wilson Reagan, RWR. The act, now wait for this, you're not going to believe this probably, and when I do the math for you, it's going to take you out. Well, I don't want to say that, but it's going to surprise you. This act granted each surviving internee U.S. $20,000. Everyone they could trace was affected by this act of internship was found and granted $20,000 in compensation, equivalent to $38,000 in last year's money. So it is really accrued in 20 years. With payments beginning in 1990, the legislation stated that governmental actions, wait for it, governmental actions had been based on, quote, and I quote, race, prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. Now, they could see this for the Japanese who were interned as a result of World War II and its effect here in America, though it wasn't fought here, but I'll get into that in a moment's time. As opposed to legitimate security reasons, a total of 82,219 persons, Japanese Americans, received redress checks. Now, I did the math. $20,000 times 82,219 gives you 1.6 billion with a capital B, north of $1.6 billion paid by the U.S. government as reparations to Japanese Americans who were interned during World War II. So what is internment? Well, it's a joke to me because this, and again, I sympathize with the Japanese Americans impacted by it, but how it is, and this is another show. I have some comparisons I'll do at another time in terms of why it was seen to be so easy to do. Number one, it affected a smaller group of people. You had 82,000 people impacted versus 12 million in some estimates of slaves who were deported, kidnapped from Africa to 14 million to 16 million, and some report that we will never know. Not let alone the 2 million plus that died in the middle the Middle Passage in the Atlantic Ocean, let alone the ones that died while not being captured in Africa. In that procedure that was the extraction from Africa, but I'm getting bogged down. So it's a joke to me being a man of color. While I sympathize with Asians or Japanese who were taken out or affected by this act of internment, but what does it mean? It's the state of being confined as a prisoner during war. For political or military reasons. The internment of Japanese Americans, more specifically, was the forced removal and confinement of approximately 120,000. Wait a minute now. Hold on. 120,000 compared to 12 million, 14 million, 16 million from the early 1700s to 1865 or so. Well, let's just keep going. And I'm being very judicious with these dates because it reaches back farther than that. But 12,000 Japanese Americans, 62% of whom were United States citizens during World War II from the West Coast. Some 5,500 Japanese American men arrested by the FBI immediately after the attack on Pearl Harbor, and you know that date, were sent directly to internment camps run by the Department of Justice, U.S. Department of Justice. And approximately 5,000 were able to voluntarily relocate, quote unquote, not slavery, not enslavement, to other parts of the country before forced evacuations began. The remainder, over 110,000 men, women, and children, were sent to relocation centers, hastily constructed camps in remote portions of the nation's interior run by the WRA, that represents War Relocation Authority. President Franklin D. Roosevelt authorized the internment with the Executive Order 9066, for those of you fact checkers, which allowed local military commanders to designate military quote unquote areas from which any quote unquote and all persons may be excluded. So meanwhile, back at the plantation, as I would put it, we have 10 to 12 million slaves who were brought to America, extracted from Africa. 2 million possibly again died in the Atlantic Ocean during the Middle Passage, let alone others sent to Asia, Portugal, as well as the Dutch, French, Danish, British, Spanish participation and involvements in these extractions associated with the slave trade. Okay, so do black and brown lives matter to the same degree as white lives? Because these were Japanese white lives who experienced the benefit, for lack of a better word, of reparations for social injustices served them by the American government during World War II, many of whom were still alive at the time, and received these reparations. Now, I realize that it was easier to find the perpetrator, U.S. government, compared to our being able to find the extractors, the slavers, slave traders, their relatives, the plantation owners, the purchasers of the slaves. It will really be an involved process, but at least make us feel good to see that this was a very short period of time as opposed to 200-300, yay, maybe 400 years of vestiges. I'll do a show on it. We'll get to that. But let's finish up with this roll call. The roll call of the unworthy, I'm giving it a new title, Unworthy, Unequal Lives of Black People Killed by White, mostly law enforcement. Now, I believe in law enforcement. When we talk about defunding the police department, I believe it should be defunded only for the purpose of redefining the police department in America, redefining the law enforcement community, getting a new feel and feeling, a new birth, as it were, new levels of sensitivity with the engagement of black and brown people. It cannot be business as usual, but not defunding to the degree that you no longer have federal dollars appropriated for law enforcement. That would be anarchy at its anarchy times 10 in America. But let's go. We left off with Alton Sterling, 37. Notice these ages. Age 37, July 5th, 2016. Police officers in Baton Rouge shot and killed Alton Sterling that's Louisiana, in an encounter recorded by a bystander on a cell telephone. Officers Blaine Salamani and Howie Lake II had responded to a call about a man threatening someone with a gun near a convenience store. Video showed the officers telling Sterling to put his hands on the hood of his car. When he did not, a struggle ensued. One of the officers yelled that Sterling was going for a gun. Protesters would later say the officers were trying to make a legal arrest and assumed he was armed and resisting. Another video recording captured Salamani's body camera and released later by the authorities recorded the officer yelling profanities, and I remember this one, at Sterling and threatening to shoot him in the head. After the shooting, Lake found a loaded .38 caliber handgun in Sterling's right pocket, officials said. The Louisiana Attorney General and the Justice Department declined to bring charges against the officers involved. Salamani was fired by his department in 2018 for violating police policies during the shooting. Philando Castile, I remember this, age 32, July 6, 2016. Police officer Geronimo, I think it is, Yanez pulled over Philando Castile, a school cafeteria manager in the suburbs near Minneapolis-St. Paul. Yanez, who said he thought Castile fit the description of a suspect in a recent robbery, approached the car window and asked Castile for his license and proof of insurance. Castile told the officer he had a firearm on him, which you're supposed to do. Yanez told him not to pull out the gun. Castile and Diamond Reynolds, who was sitting in the passenger seat, both said he was not reaching for the gun. Yanez screamed again at Castile not to pull his gun out, drew out his own weapon, and fired 7 shots. Counted 5, 6, 7 shots at him. Police dashboard camera footage showed. The officer later told investigators he believed Castile was not listening to him and moving his hand. You're not supposed to not go home because a police officer believes you're not paying attention. That's their own perception. Whether it's true or not has yet to be proven, and that's what the court of law is designed to prove. And moving your hand, I mean, you either moved it or you didn't. The video camera... So again, Yanez also told that he feared for his own life and the lives of the car's other passengers. Reynolds, whose 4-year-old daughter was sitting in the back seat, took her phone and began live streaming the encounter on Facebook, footage that spread around the world. Yanez, an officer with the St. Anthony, Minnesota Police Department, was charged with manslaughter and endangering the lives of Reynolds and her 4-year-old daughter. One of Yanez's bullets went through the driver's seat and hit the seat behind him, could have struck the child. At trial, 2017, Yanez was acquitted on all charges. This would never happen in the white community. The police department said he would not return to the force and that it would offer him a quote, end quote, voluntary separation agreement. The plot thickens, which city officials said was reached not long after the trial. Calling the roll. Do black and brown lives matter? Yes, they matter to God, but do they matter to the white majority, to this country, to the same value, worth, and equality? on all fronts, all aspects, all levels. Terrence Crutcher, I remember this one. September 26, 2016, Tulsa, Oklahoma, police officer Betty Jo Shelby's manslaughter trial begins Monday, May 8th in the shooting of Crutcher. Here it is. Wait for it for the people on the right side of the back of the room. An unarmed man. Shelby, who is white, shot the 40-year-old man on September 16th, shortly after she arrived on the street to find Crutcher's SUV stopped in the middle of the road. Crutcher was seen without a weapon and with his hands up on videos from a patrol car dashboard and a police helicopter before Shelby shot him like a dog in the street. Police Chief Chuck Jordan said Crutcher did not have a gun on his body nor in his SUV. Shelby pleaded not guilty. Calling the roll, do Black Lives Matter to the same degree that white lives matter in these yet to be United States? Jordan Edwards, April 29th, 2017, 15-year-old black, fatally shot Saturday, April 29th by a suburban Dallas police officer while a passenger in a car that was moving away, not in reverse towards officers, just moving away. Balch Springs Police Chief Jonathan Haber said Monday that police video contradicts his department's original statement about the high school freshman's killing by officers investigating an underage drinking complaint at a house party Edwards was leaving. The officer, identified as Roy Oliver, was fired Tuesday for violating department policies in Edwards' death. Oliver is white, according to the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement. Calling the roll, Ahmad, as some people pronounce it, Arbery, age 25. You'll remember this. This was just a few months ago, February 23rd. Ahmad Arbery was jogging near his home in Glenn County, Georgia, when Gregory McMichael and his son Travis began following Arbery in a truck. William Roddy Bryan Jr. followed Arbery and the McMichaels in his own vehicle. Gregory McMichael, a white retired police detective. Entitlement. Feelings of white entitlement in America that somehow that white people feel this is their country, which needs a bit more protection than black and brown people should feel this is our country, which we helped build by significant contributions. That's another show for another time. So in a video, we're backing up. Gregory McMichael, a white retired police detective, later told police that he believed Arbery looked like a person suspected in local break-ins. Looked like, because we all look alike anyway, and we've got to get over that between ethnic groups. And that he yelled at Arbery to stop so that they could talk. Who does that? You see, it takes something for white people to understand that because you ask an adult male who is black, a man, to stop, does not mean he has to stop to give you the time of day. He has every option to exercise a no to that request, just as you do. If Black Lives Matter to the same degree as white lives matter, black people should be able to respond just as do white people. This is a point of contention by itself. Now, I know I get all kinds of pushback, but it's okay. The truth should stand for itself. Here it is in a video shot by Brian Arbery the later victim, can be seen running around McMichael's truck, and then a shot is fired. Travis McMichael, who is seen outside of the truck holding a shotgun, then appears to struggle with Arbery before two more shots are fired. Arbery then staggers away, crumpling to the ground, dying at the scene. Needlessly, only because some white person who feels their life values to a different degree than that of a black adult male with a shotgun shoot him like they're hunting deer. Not a handgun, a shotgun, which carries some other idioms in contentions, perceived contentions. Here it is. Brian, who was also white, told a Georgia Bureau of Investigation agent that Travis McMichael had called Arbery a racial epithet after shooting him. You can go back and fact check this. It will break your heart if you are a right-thinking person. According to the agent's testimony during a June preliminary hearing, initially the three men faced, wait for it, people at the left side of the room won't believe this, no charges, with video footage of the man completely innocent, only jogging and not obeying their commands as if they are still on the plantation. Here it is. A prosecutor who later recused himself from the case wrote that the McMichaels, father and son, could be justified in holding Arbery under the state's citizens law arrest. That must only apply to black males. I've never heard of a white male exercising a citizen's arrest law to hold another white male. I've never heard of that. But when it comes to black people, since we're discussing whether or not black and brown lives matter to the same degree of value, worth, and equity, we have to explore these kinds of mindsets. Could have held him under the state citizens arrest law, and that Travis McMichael shot Arbery in self-defense. This is a judge, a prosecutor better. But more than 2 months after Arbery's death, Brian's video of the encounter was made public and went viral, prompting outrage. And see, that's if people had been silent, which there was a lot of silence for months, because I think about 4 months passed before the video was released and went viral. After the video was released and people started making a noise, that's when the adrenaline of the legal process, which should have taken place and should have been pumping the whole time, that's when it picks up. And now some form of justice, or at least attention, is given to this particular case. But more than 2 months after his death, the video was released, prompting outrage and condemnation of the shooting. Within days, Gregory and Travis McMichael were charged with murder and aggravated assault. Weeks later, Brian was also charged with felony murder and criminal attempt to commit false imprisonments. Lawmakers are now trying to change the citizens arrest law. Breonna Taylor, age 26, shortly after midnight, March 13th, 3 police officers used a battering ram to enter the Louisville home of Breonna Taylor, a black emergency room technician. Notice, she is at home. As part of a narcotics suspicion, I should better put it. Police said her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker, shot at the officers, striking one in the leg. Police fired more than 20 shots, according to a lawsuit filed by Taylor's family, which we know last week an out-of-court settlement was reached, probably in the area somewhere of around $10 or $12 million, I'm hearing, striking Taylor at least 8 times, killing her. No drugs. No drugs were recovered from the home. Walker, who was black, was charged with the attempted murder of a police officer. Confines, which should be safe. Do black and brown lives matter? Come on, right-thinking people. Right thinking, not white thinking. Right-thinking people. Tell me These are just a few cases. They're littered all over social media, all over the news. It's easy to find. Nightly protests have roiled Louisville and other things because of that. George Floyd, 46, we've talked about him. May 25th, allegedly passing a $20. You're not supposed to die because of a $20 alleged counterfeit bill. You're not supposed to die in America. Would this have happened had the color of his skin been white? Any of these people whose names I've called the roll representing. You know about this. I forgot to try to close this. George Floyd, Rayshard Brooks, June 12th. This year, 27-year-old who fell asleep in the Wendy's parking lot, and he is no longer with us. Jacob Blake shot 7 times in the back because there's, and then, wow, Kyle Rittenhouse, 17, who's killed one of the protesters. How does a 17-year-old obtain an assault rifle? And police officers, their footage where they walk right past him. Where were his parents? He's 17 years of age. How did he cross the state line? And would he have been, had he been black and he would have had an AK, an assault rifle, I should say, strapped to his back, he would have been asking questions. If he had not been, then we could make possibly an argument that black and brown lives matter to the same degree as all lives in this country. But you see, because no one even questions him, this tells us that he has another value assessed to his life that is not equally assessed to people of color, of the darker hue and persuasion. September 2nd, 2020, California police officer who was captured on video fatally shooting a black man who had a baseball bat inside a Walmart earlier this year was charged with manslaughter. The wheels of justice creep very slowly when it impacts people of color. The office of Alameda County District Attorney Nancy O'Malley said that Stephen Taylor, 33 years of age, a black male, did not pose an imminent threat to anyone in the store or the officer, Jason Fletcher, a white officer, who shot this man to death on April 18th. The security guard in the store calls 911, disturbing police. Recording of the call says that you can see the call says that someone with a baseball bat is attempting to leave the store without paying, someone says. I think it was the security officer of the store. So Taylor can be seen standing in the store's checkout area with Fletcher when Fletcher, the officer, approaches him and tries unsuccessfully to take the bat. Taylor backs up several feet, bat in hand, plastic bat. Fletcher tells him to drop it. When he doesn't, from a distance of roughly 17 feet, according to the district attorney's statement, Fletcher draws his gun, a stun gun, firstly, fired as Taylor moved toward him. The prosecutor's office said Taylor was clearly in shock after he was stunned and struggled to remain standing with the bat pointed toward the floor. In the video, customers can be heard shouting, put it down, before Fletcher opened fire, striking this man in the chest. In the video, he then tosses the bat to the floor and walks a few feet before collapsing. He's pronounced dead, D-E-A-D, at the scene. And just listen to the attorneys. I'm very confident that the jury, hearing all the evidences in this case, will acquit this officer in short order. This is what the defense attorney states. A lawyer for Taylor's family, Lee Merritt, has said that Taylor was struggling with a mental health crisis when Fletcher shot him to death. It was, in quotes, an involuntary break from reality, Merritt said. This is the family's attorney. He needed help, but he got brutality. Do black lives matter when you need help? But the reciprocal, you reciprocate it with death? So how do we resolve these inequities between the races? I told you once, I'll tell you again, because I believe it to be true. Jesus is the answer. If he is received and taught, modeled, and his spirit is able to lead people equally to overcome biases, racisms, and prejudices that have been taught. That's the given. But how do you resolve any type of education or ignorance? And that's what this is. By education. Schools never address racism in mammoth proportions as they should. Homes, is this talked about in white homes? It was talked about in my home growing up because my parents were interested in me being able to return home. So we had to talk about inequities, and I've had to do it with my sons, my daughter. I've had to do it as a pastor to tell people to prepare them for issues they can face in the street because of these inequities that I know exist. And if anybody else does not know them, they are a believer in all of the fairy tales. Alice in Wonderland, they're living in Wonderland. So how do churches? Churches are great places where opportunities can be taken to educate and prepare people, give them a readiness and an awareness on both sides of the spectrum, black and white. I wish white churches would, and I'm choosing my words very judiciously, would honestly not argue. Just like in these issues, people were willing to argue with video footage and say that what they see is not what happened. In many cases, case after case after case. Can we just be honest and address these issues? If black churches can address them, then white churches can address them. And we can receive and learn on both sides of the spectrum. But truth has to be addressed in order for this to occur. Which brings me to my next point. Truth regarding historical origins of biases and segregationist ideals must be addressed. The truth. How did we get here? What was your thinking? What propagated your thinking? What did your mother teach you this? Was this taught and modeled by your father? Was it right? Let's examine it for what it is. We cannot allow these issues to continue to insert themselves in American culture. And with what is happening in the White House, man, a self implosion. We've had a civil war in this country once before. It's my prayer we are not on the precipice of another, based on race once again. I'll say this, and I'll have to close. Correct race-based ideals and color-induced actions must be presented to people. In other words, I remember reading when black and brown people began seeing themselves on the silver screen, as it was then called. Sidney Poitier, Harry Belafonte, other people of color, Cicely Tyson, Diane Carroll. When black people started seeing themselves portrayed in movies and on television in positive roles rather than step and fetch it, rather than the making of the real pejorative display of blackface by white actors in the making of a nation. And I'm going to do an entire show or shows on that movie. It's amazing. this insertion of positive roles besides athletes, thank God for them. Maybe okay, that perhaps is some one way that people of color have been able to have some level of equity as far as their pay scale by athletics. Thank God for that. But besides that, we have to see black people who are, and again, and I'll end with this. I'm going to do. Let me allow me to make a comment. My white evangelical brothers, they are weighing in. Man, I watched a show in Chicago last week, a faith conference, and the first night had again one of my previous heroes of faith, and it's still a hero of faith as far as the word of God and its presentation is concerned. But I cannot accept their racist doctrine and their racist ideas. So I can, by the grace of God, tolerate their revelation in the scriptures, but not their racist, bigoted stances as far as people of color. And it's very sublime. But I watched this last week, and I'm trying not to call names. But the challenge is these men and women are becoming so vocal and verbal, white evangelicals in support of this nation's president. But they were not verbal at all with number 44. A man with no scandals, a man whose administration was responsible for capturing and the killing of Osama bin Laden, a man who built the economy after the failings of 2007, 2008, when he takes office. This president rides on his coattails. None of these people were verbal. They didn't defend him. They didn't applaud him. They were silent. But all of a sudden now, with the fiascos that we are experiencing in Washington, these men and women are supporting this president like nothing I've ever seen. We can no longer be silent. I'll finish. Business philosopher Jim Rohn, I close each show with this quote, makes this statement: sincerity is not a test of truth. We must not make this mistake. He must be right. He is so sincere, he or she. It is possible to be sincerely wrong. We can only judge truth by truth and sincerity by sincerity. Just as there's a time to keep silent, there's also a time to speak. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 7 says, a time to rend, a time to sow, a time to keep silent, and there is a time to speak. Silence is only golden. This is a new one I heard in my heart earlier today, as late as today, as recently as today. It has been said in the old adage that silence is golden. But I heard this and ringing around in my head. Silence is golden only until one's family and friends are negatively impacted by wrongdoings. You won't be silent then. You shouldn't be silent now. Silence is compromise. Silence is complicity with erroneous thinking. Silence is agreement with sanitized or whitewashed history. Silence is co-signing with control, racist, bigoted, and supremacy mentalities. Liberty and justice end in silence. Until next week, and I thank you for sharing this particular link. I thank you for visiting our Facebook page and pages, as well as the YouTube subscriptions going up. We appreciate you so very much. Until next week at the 6:30 p.m. Central Standard Time, remember, we can no longer be silent. Blessings.